This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 295, 31 Days of Migration. Welcome to Talking Drupal. I'm Stephen Cross. Today, joining us, we have Mauricio Dinarte joining us to talk about migration. Mauricio, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Thanks for joining.
So Mauricio is a worker, owner, and developer Agaric, right? That's how you say it.
Yes, Agaric.
Agaric. Okay, sorry. He also is a trainer. He has a website, understandingdrupal.com. He's a Nicaraguan community lead. He regularly organizes and presents on global training days, global sprint weekends, and meetups. And you can find him on Twitter in D.O as Dinacron, Dinacron. Thanks for joining us.
That's Dinarcon, Dinarcon.
Isn't that what I said?
You inverted the C and the R.
Oh, did I? Okay.
And something funny there is that understandingdrupal.com was already registered, so it's understand Drupal like in imperative.
Okay.
So I was too late to the registration party.
Okay.
But that's still a really good domain. I was pretty impressed that you were able to catch that one.
Let's see. So did I get two things wrong in his intro? Anyway, so joining me as usual is that other voice you hear is Nick Laughlin. Nick, what is new with you this week?
Good afternoon, everybody. Or no, it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. New this week for me is my irises have exploded. I don't know what happened this year, but my garden's doing great.
Not in your eyes.
Not in my eyes. But I've got I'll have to put a picture in the show notes this week, but I've got a iris plant that has probably 30 or 40 blooms. Just going really strong, really happy how my garden's turned out this year. You know, had probably 15, 20 daffodils and a bunch of crocuses. And now, you know, the summer or late spring, early summer plants are starting to come in. So looking forward to see how
spring is here.
Yep.
Spring is finally here. The weather's beautiful. John Picozzi is off this week. He is taking holiday, so we hope he's enjoying himself. Mauricio, each week we update our listeners on things that have been interesting that we've done for the week. Do you have anything to share with us?
Yes, so conveniently related to the topic of today's podcast is that I started working on the second edition already. Last weekend, I spent some time configuring some tools to help me with the writing process, specifically Bail, to detect language errors. Not being a native English speaker for me, this is important. And also Markdown Lean, because I am unifying from 3 different systems that I wrote the first series into one. So I'm pretty much getting set up into producing the best that I can in the second edition of the series.
Oh, interesting. I'll have some questions about that process. We should add that to the show notes of because I know you have blog posts, you have PDF, you have, Mobi files. So I guess those are all coming from a single source.
Yes.
Interesting. And for me this week, my wife had been wanting to do a juice cleanse for a long time, which is like a detox. So I'm on the 7th day of a juice cleanse, which is basically 5 bottles of juice a day and nothing else but water. So I managed to survive. It was super interesting. My wife did, I did find that I felt good all week. Never got, like they say, you get headaches and you feel weak. I've had lots of energy. I did have problems, like it was a colonoscopy preparation, if anyone's had a colonoscopy before.
I can imagine.
And it's been like that for me for almost 7 days. So I'm glad this thing is over, but it was good to do. I lost a few pounds and it was a good experience. So I would say if anyone's ever wants to give it a try, go ahead and do it. The idea of it is to be the beginning of making some changes to your diet. So I was already eating pretty well, but I think this is going to just get me back in shape after this winter.
Yeah, I think the mental kind of change is what's important. I'm really not a huge fan of crash diets and things like that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people take them too far, but just a couple of days and doing something to kind of reset your mind on what you're eating is I think sometimes good.
Yeah, and that's really what this was for us. It wasn't really about like a crash diet. It was more about the reset for us. So so it's been an interesting experience. So now we can get on to some more important things. Our topic of the day, I titled this 31 Days of Migration because that is the blog series that Mauricio published about a year ago, I think. And I'm in the middle of kicking off a migration with a project that I'm working on. I've dabbled with migration a bit in the past, and I started to do some research into resources for migration, and then saw Mauricio's presentation at DrupalCon, which he talked about migration. So that's why I invited him here today. So in this show, we're going to talk about like the resources that he's created, and maybe some tips he has for people who are in the position of they're getting started, and what should they do, and how should they go about it. So let's start with like, Mauricio, what is the elevator pitch for the blog series called 31 Days of Migration?
I would say that it is a step-by-step guide to dive into the migration system. If you have never worked with a migration before, this is going to teach you the concepts and throughout a lot of examples, what you need to do to write a successful migration project, from reading different sources, producing different type of entities like nodes, users, paragraph, and so on, but also like the hurdles that you might find along the way, how to debug migrations, how to have a big picture of the Migrate ecosystem, because there are tons of modules that integrate with this API, so you can benefit from that. It's basically distilling years of work and writing to my past self to have a solid guide into the Migrate API.
So what was your main purpose for creating it and publishing this?
So I've been doing Drupal for almost 11 years now, and I started my first migration project when I was well into my 5th year of development, probably. So, naively, I said, this is going to be easy. Like, I've been doing Drupal development, like real, programming and stuff for quite some time. So I said, it's just like another API that I need to learn. But it turned out not to be the case. It turned out like to be really confusing. Like in the end, I said to myself, I only want to move some content into my website. Why does it has to be so complicated? And the reason for it is because I didn't understand the concepts, the paradigms behind the API. So that's what I say. Like, I wrote this to my past self to help me with that. Like, after putting together all these pieces, now I have this guide, now I have this path to write something, and ultimately, like, that's my goal, like sharing as much as possible so other people don't have to go through that lengthy process of figuring out bits and pieces till you get something useful.
So who is the series for? Is it for junior developers looking to start their first migration? Is it a reference for people who are experienced in migrations, just as a hey, how do I do that particular piece? I don't remember. Is it for business people thinking about migrating some content? Who's your intended audience?
So that's interesting, because starting with Drupal 8 and moving forward, the Migrate API switched the way that you write the migrations from PHP before to YAML files. And I know that for some people, this might be frustrating. And if you are a developer, you might just want to dive into the PHP code yourself, because, for example, you can have help from your IDE with interfaces, classes, and so on. But something that I really like about the new approach is that it lowers the barriers of entry. Like, anyone, literally without prior development experience, can write migrations and be successful in that. So my goal is site builders. Like, if you're a site builder, that you need to write a migration for nodes, users, paragraph, taxonomies, by following the book, the series of blog posts, you should be able to accomplish that. And because that is the case, if you're a developer, I also put technical notes for those that are interested into that. Like there are articles about debugging, like going deeper into the topics. So, but the primary goal is someone who is just a site builder that understands some basic concepts like what is a node, what is a user. They want to import content into Drupal. So that's my target.
Do you cover anything about content planning? Like how do you determine what content, how to like decide what content should move and what should be kind of manual and what should be automated? Or do you just say, just dive right in, assume that planning has already happened?
No, there are actually the very first article in the series. It's just talking about the ETL process, extract, transform, and load. That is the paradigm behind the migration API. So I start with concepts, and as I progress through the examples, I also give recommendations. There are a couple of articles that are specifically about recommendations, like what things you should consider, what things can be or should be automatically migrated, what can you do manually, like a cleanup before or after. So I try to be as practical as possible. There is an accompanying code repository with 20-ish code examples, like all of them, just like clone the repository and it will get you will get set up basically from there. So it includes both like the technical parts, the recommendations, and the code examples.
So,
Cool.
so if it's not clear by the title, just so everyone knows, 31 days of migration, the idea is that you do one article a day and it basically assumes you know nothing, I think,
Right.
and then moves you through the series. And I think I'm on day 10. I started it like a week and a half ago, and I think I'm on day 10. You could clearly, the lessons are short enough that you could do multiple in one day. You could probably get through the 31 days in a day or two if you really wanted to.
Yes. So some context behind that, when I was writing the series, each article, depending on the complexity, it took about anywhere between 8 to sometimes 20 hours to write. And the goal was to publish one article a day. So that was in the month of August 2019. I just had so much time to produce that amount of content. And it like some of the, of the length of the articles is determined by, you don't want to make it extremely long, but also like the boundaries in which I had to write them in the first place.
Yeah, I think, maybe later in the show, I'd definitely like to dig into that process, because I think any of us that have written migrations or complex migrations afterwards, like, wow, that was really complicated. I need to write an article about it so that it helps other people get over that hurdle. And there's just so few people that have actually dove in and made that contribution back, because you start to realize how unique it is and how hard it is to make it like generic, generically helpful. So somebody thinking about going through your kind of series, what are the prerequisites? You kind of mentioned some site builders, some somewhat non-technical people, but other than kind of knowing what a node is, knowing what Drupal is, other tools that they should have installed or be familiar with, the terminology they should be familiar with before starting the 31 days?
So in terms of knowledge, my only assumption is that you are familiar with basic site builder concepts like users, nodes, taxonomy terms, and so on. In terms of other, technical things, if you will, I go over a lot about running migrations from the terminal. So using Drush and using some contributed modules that provide Drush commands, that is another thing. It is not required because there are some examples in the last part of the series that show you how to run migrations from the user interface, but to save a lot of time, and I would say that's like the real world scenario, like you are going to be working with migration through the terminal, executing Drush commands and so on. It's recommended that you are familiar with that, and I provide, very detailed information about what is the structure of your where you place the modules, what the commands are going to be executed, what is the purpose of each command. So I try to take you step by step into the whole process. But as long as you have some basic site building concepts, which I also refer to during the series, and some familiarity with the terminal and Drush, you are good to go. One important thing that if you're hearing this at the time that it was recorded or it was released, we are in a transition period in the Migrate API at the moment, starting with Drush 10.4, which was released earlier this year. The Drush commands were integrated into Drush itself, into Drush core. So I see a lot of support questions in Slack about people saying, this doesn't work. And many times it's because they are trying to use modules that are not compatible with those commands being in Drupal, in Drush core itself. So sometimes you might have to ping to an older version of Drush while things catch up. But one of the goals of the series and one of the main motivation of writing a second edition is to keep everything up to date. Like on a regular basis, I go over the articles and update them. But I think like these changes, along with some improvements to the API itself, deserve a full, bigger effort, and that's why I'm writing a second edition at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I ran into a few of those issues myself in maybe the first few exercises. And I figured out what was happening, but it's interesting to see. And that's one of my questions I'm going to ask you later, but I'll ask you now. How much of a moving target is this when you're writing a series like this? Like, is you post something as a blog post, how quick does it go stale, do you think, after you've written it?
So this was written in August 2019, and I would say that for the most part, it is still relevant. One of the things that I'm planning to add is just like, before you start, read this blog post, because the Migrate API is, and not only that, Drupal in general is always changing. So there are a couple of things like what I just mentioned that, need to be updated. But in general, the Migrate API, I usually say it is one of the best documented systems in Drupals, but it's also one of the more stables as well. Like we need to get this right since the very beginning. Like we were talking about operating from previous version of Drupal and so on. So it's for the most part additions. Like sometimes I will update an article to add something new, but it's not something that breaks. Introducing the Migrate runner into Drush itself, that's, I would say the biggest thing that has happened since it was originally published. But I usually keep the articles updated. Like I would go over over them, once, twice a month, check if something is missing and something related. I use them when providing support, and people get back to me saying, hey, there is an error here, there is something that is not clear there. So the feedback that I get also just like improves the content in general.
So when we're talking about migration, we're talking about like moving data and structure from site A to site B. And I think a lot of people just in the Drupal world right now are thinking, when they're thinking about migration, they're thinking about getting off of Drupal 7 and going to Drupal 8 or 9. What does this series cover in terms of migration?
So the series is about the Migrate API in general. And by that, I mean understanding the ETL process that I mentioned at the beginning, that the first article, then how to write your first migration, very simple, like some title and some text in an article. After that, we go about learning the syntax of the Migrate API, things like constants, pseudo fields, what are the different parts of a migration: source, process, destination, plugins. After having the basics, we go about migrating different type of fields, like if you have an address, if you have a URL, subfields, because some fields can contain like multiple pieces of data. Like for example, in a rich text field, you have the main copy that you want to present, but you also get to select the input format. So those are called subfields in the Migrate API, and we cover all the basics in terms of syntax. After that, we provide some general recommendations of tips, workflows for running migration, and then we get into like migrating into different entity targets like files, users, paragraph, taxonomy terms, and so on. After we cover that, we go over migrating from different sources like CSV files, JSON, XML, Word, not Word, Excel documents, LibreOffice Calc documents, Google Sheets, and so on. So it's like understand the basics, the syntax, then being able to write to multiple targets, then being able to read from multiple sources. And then the last part is about, all of this now. And guess what? There is a completely different way of managing migrations, that is via configuration entities. And now we explore that. At the very end, we conclude with how to debug migrations and talking about the ecosystem in general, and one article at the end about what you need to consider if you want to upgrade to Drupal 8 or 9 or 10, coming from Drupal 6 or Drupal 7. So this particular series is focused on the Migrate API as a whole. This one is comes together with a video course that extends on this migration series, but I have plans to release another course later that is specifically about upgrading. Like if you're coming from 6 or 7 and you want to move into Drupal 8, that would be specifically for that. But the current one is about the Migrate API as a whole.
So does the course also talk about like custom plugins and transforms as well? Or does it kind of just focus on the actual kind of one-to-one migrations?
The series itself doesn't cover how to write plugins in general. The video course does. Like there is an example of how to create one. In the example specifically is about how to process meta tags. If you have a custom structure and you want to migrate into meta tags in Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, that is shown in the course, but not in the book. Something to clarify, the book is available to read online for free at understanddrupal.com. And it also comes in an ebook version. But in the website itself, I have continued reading more about migrations, and I plan to continue writing more about migrations. So a lot of these topics, even though they have not made it into blog posts themselves, those are in the horizon.
Okay. You mentioned the video course a couple of times, and you mentioned that the plugins are covered in the video course. So what are the differences between the course and the video course are there?
So for one, the migration series is free to read online. The migration series is also available as an ebook download. It costs $10. But I have given it away a lot of times in different Drupal camps. I want to make the content as accessible as possible. The video course is a paid one, so there are different tiers. There is a basic package, intermediate package, advanced package, as each of them covers different topics. For example, the basic one, how to read from CSV JSON, how to work with both Drush and the user interface, how to transform different type of data, and how to get content into paragraph. So it's basically a overpowered, I would say, version of the migrations series that I teach you like step by step and in video format, like how to do it. Then in the intermediate one, we cover how to migrate media entities, multi-value, nested paragraph, URL aliases, meta tags, and how to write custom migration process plugins. In the advanced package, we go about parsing HTML, like if you want to migrate from HTML directly, how to do that, how to update content that you have already migrated before, how to interact with the API. For example, if you need to consume an external endpoint and you have an API key, how to configure that so that the API key is not exposed in plain text somewhere. And in general, how to debug migrations. Like we go through a very broken migration and explain the debugging process and the things that you need to consider when you face a problem in the migration. So the package, I would say the video course, each of the packages is equivalent to a full day training. And in fact, one of them was a training that was presented at DrupalCon some years ago.
And how much are those different tiers? Do you know?
So each of the tiers is $200 at the moment, and you can get the full package for 500. But I also support what is called purchasing parity power or something like that, PPP. So if you're unable to afford the retail price, you can submit a form, and you will get significantly high discounts for the course. And to be honest, like if anyone really needs the information, I don't want to keep it. The only reason why I have to charge is because it's a lot of time that I need to invest, and I need to find a way to make it sustainable.
Yeah, of course. So I got a question there. If someone was starting out with your series, would you recommend them doing the book or the blog posts before doing the videos, or do the videos cover the same material that's in the books and you could just jump right into the first video set?
So for one, I offer options because people learn differently. Some people prefer reading, some people prefer video. So that's an option. In terms of the content, I would say that the book itself, the series, overlaps probably 50% with the basic package of the video series.
Okay.
Because that's the book, as I mentioned before, I teach how to import content from like 5, 6, 7 different sources. In the video series, it's only about CSVs and JSON. But then we dive deeper into some other topics. So there is some overlap in between. Like if you have never touched migration and you're fine with just reading, I would recommend starting with the series because it's free and it's going to give you a solid foundation for whatever you do next, whether the video course or just jumping directly into your own projects.
Okay. So beyond if no one's ever done a migration before and they need to plan for one, one way to start would be to start with your series. But I'm interested to know what your advice would be as some of the things people should think about as they're starting to plan a migration.
So I guess that one of the things that I see often in support in Slack is that people seem to jump too fast into trying to write the migration and not necessarily take the time to step back and think about why they want to do this and how they need to do it. I'm talking specifically about understanding your data model. Like you have a very solid understanding of how your data is structured, whether if you come from Drupal 6, Drupal 7, or something completely different, and how it's going to be structured in your destination, Drupal 8, Drupal 9, and so on. So usually, and this is shown in the course, I try to prepare like diagrams talking about how things are going to map, how the data is going to flow. So taking the time to plan, to understand your source, your destination, what transformations need to be in place, like having that blueprint, if you will, in advance will yield far better results than just like jumping into the migrations themselves. And another thing is that I would recommend learning about the basic concepts and the basic syntax of the Migrate API, whether in the book series that we're talking about or some other resources. Like sometimes people ask questions that it's about the syntax itself. It's just like understanding how this particular piece of the Migrate API works. In Drupal.org, it is very well documented as well, the Migrate API. So I would recommend taking the time for the planning of how the content is going to move and just learning about the syntax of the API itself.
That actually just made me, this might be a fairly obvious question, but do you do migrations for clients as well? Is that something that a service you provide? If somebody, maybe they want to get started on migration and they feel it's a little out of their depth, is that something they can hire you to kind of guide them through, train them, and get them on their path?
Yeah, at Agari.coop, we offer both consultancy, like if you want to hand over the project to us, we offer training if you need us to train your team, and we also offer just like one-on-one consultation and staff augmentation. So maybe you have a team already, but you are missing that migration expertise, you can hire us and we provide that. So in terms of offers, we are willing to whatever fits your needs. And yeah, we like I personally work on migrations most of the time. So, and a couple of projects at a time.
Yeah, and I've not worked with Mauricio myself, but I have worked with Agaric, so I can attest to their migration expertise for sure. Some of the first migrations I ever worked on was actually on a project with them. A lot of times people conflate migration and upgrades or updates in Drupal. Can you kind of give us a really high-level overview? What's the difference between a migration and a Drupal update?
So a migration, for the most part, is when you are trying to get your 6 or 7 site into 8 or later. So it's basically a major version jump. Starting with Drupal 8, those major version jumps like Drupal 9, Drupal 10 are not as radical as before. So for the most part, you can keep the same code base, you can keep the same modules and so on. So I would say that in terms of terminology, there might be some confusion there, but an upgrade is like an upgrade is like a migration where you come from Drupal 6 or Drupal 7 or even Drupal 5. I have had some people, inquiring about that into
Wow.
Drupal 8 or later. After that, starting with Drupal 8, for the most part, you're going to be doing updates, like as in the same way that you go from 8.8 to 8.9, you go to 9.0, you go to 10.0. Those are considered updates. And the reason is that because starting in Drupal 8 onwards, the content model is mostly the same. You don't need to do anything special to get to the newer version. Some of the motivation for a migration project is that the content model is different in your source and your destination. So the Migrate API is going to help you make those transformations. So for the most part, that would be it. A migration/upgrade is 6 or 7 to Drupal 8 Plus, or coming from external sources into Drupal 8 Plus.
I mean, I would take it a step further and say migration is purely about just moving the data. So, for example, I had a client about a year and a half ago that we migrated. It was actually a non-Drupal site. It was a homegrown CMS. We moved them over to Drupal 8, migrated everything in, and that company just acquired another company, so they need to now migrate all that content in as well. And so it's coming from a non-Drupal site into an existing Drupal site that's already had migrations run, and we're just migrating some new content in. So I would even just say migrations can be, at any point in the life cycle, you just need to move data in bulk in a repeatable manner into an existing site or into a site.
Yeah, that's something very important to understand. And the Migrate API will not help you migrate your custom code. It will not help you migrate your custom themes. It's specifically about moving the data. And in Drupal 8, that means like the content structure, like the configuration of the site, and also the data itself, like the content. So if you want to go like a little bit technical, both configuration entities and content entities, you can migrate, you can get into Drupal using the Migrate API, but custom code or custom themes, that's not what the Migrate API is for.
Yeah.
There are tools like Drupal Rector that can help you with moving code, but the Migrate API is not designed for that.
Yeah. And the Migrate API can be used for other things that aren't really migration too. When you're thinking about just moving data from point A to point B, right? Like in Drupal 7, the feeds module was a tool that we all use to pull data into Drupal. I don't even know if that's available. Is feeds even available on 8 anymore?
It is.
Okay.
And there is also a related project called Feeds Migrate that it's supposed to be the Feeds UI, but as with the Migrate API as a backend. But that's still a separate project. One thing to note about that, we have a project called Find It Cambridge. It is for the city of Cambridge in Massachusetts, and it is about finding opportunities for children and parents to do, as promoted by the city itself. One of the things that we do in that project is that we need to consume content from external API from city resources. We do them on a daily basis. So basically, we're using the Migrate API in the way that Feeds was used in Drupal 7. Like we are consuming an API on a daily basis, creating and updating content along the way.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think I've seen that site before as well.
One
go ahead.
one more thing about this site is that it is funded by the city of Cambridge, and it is completely open source. So we can put that in the show notes, the links to the repositories. But it is based on a platform called Drutopia. That's a Drupal distribution, and on top of that, the Migrate and this project specific stuff. But all of it is open source, so you can look at the migrations and how it was configured.
If you could get us a link in the bottom of the show notes when we're done to that project,
Sure.
Be interesting to share that with everybody.
So I have this question, and I don't think there's a really good place, so I guess I'll just ask it now. Have you done any migrations related to Layout Builder?
Yes.
And how is that? Do you have any training materials on that? How is that process? Is it as painful as I expect it would be?
So let me tie this back with understanding your source and your destination. Layout Builder is not necessarily complex, but there are like 2 or 3 entities that you need to create along the way to get your data into Layout Builder, and at some point there is some serialization that you need to do. So most of the time, this is about understanding how that target works. Once you do that, it's about, okay, I need to create a section, I need to create this other entity, I need to serialize it, and you basically have a blueprint of what you need to do. Specifically about Layout Builder, I have done this in the past. It's not as crazy as I thought it would be. But as everything, the more things that you throw at it, the more complex it becomes. For example, I say that paragraph itself is one of the simplest migration that you can do. When do paragraphs become complicated? When you have multi-value, when you have multilingual, when you have revisions. So the same happens for Layout Builder. If you have a Layout Builder migration that you only have the latest revision that is in one language, that is not crazy nested in terms of the layouts that you're trying to migrate, is relatively straightforward. When you start throwing things at it, like node-specific overrides plus the other things that I mentioned before, then it's when things become more complex. I work on a site that it was like one of the biggest ones, several, I don't know if the scale is thousands of millions at this point, but it was a lot of data, and some of that was getting into Layout Builder. So, taking the time to understand, that content model of your target is very important. Something similar happens with organic groups. I have been doing a lot of organic groups to groups migration. So take the time to learn about the content model, how entities relate to each other, and after that it's just like, okay, you need to follow this 3, 5, 10-step process, and that's it. For Layout Builder, there was a session at DrupalCon online 2021 North America. I don't know what's the name really of the conference anymore, but there was a session about Layout Builder migration, so you can refer
Chris
to that
Wells.
as well.
Was that the Chris Wells did that, right?
Yes.
So the real deep question is: have you done a migration out of Layout Builder into something? That's the one that I fear those are coming down the road, and I think that's going to be the real beast.
Yeah, I have migrated into Layout Builder. I have not migrated out of Layout Builder yet, and to be honest, both Layout Builder and Paragraph are kind of in the same boat. They have relatively complex data structures under the hood. So, getting in is not crazy. Getting out, I haven't had the experience yet, but I think it might be more complicated than getting in.
If any of our listeners have done that, I'd be curious to hear about your war stories migrating something out of Layout Builder, because it has to have happened at some, at this point by somebody, but I can't imagine it's too common. People are still probably fairly enamored with that.
Let me talk a little bit about what I would do in that regard. Something that I have seen a lot of questions popping up lately is like how you do a Drupal to Drupal migration in the sense of 8 to 8, 9 to 9, and maybe when it comes 10 to 10. And you might ask, why do you want to do this? Because the content structure, the content model has changed and you want to reflect those changes. If we stick to the Drupal 8 life cycle, somewhere in the middle, we got media entities that were not part of the initial Drupal 8 release. So maybe you want to adopt that. So there are actually modules that use the Migrate API that can help you go from file to media entities. So something similar, like maybe there is an improvement and, either paragraph or layout builder was not ready when you initially created the site, but the ecosystem has now matured, and you want to leverage that functionality, those extra features. So you do a migration within your current site into the new structure. So when you are doing that, one of the benefits is that you have the full Drupal API at your disposal. So you can, call the services, the API itself for layout builder, for paragraph, and from those create like temporarily like files, like, do an entity load operation and create a JSON file from there. And then you migrate that JSON file. You are not required to read directly from the database and that structure. Like you can, you can do it if you want. Like there is support in Drupal core already to move configuration from another Drupal 8 or 9 site. There is support for moving content like that is in the same database. And there is another module on the contrib space that you can use to do a 8-to-8, 9-to-9 migration from a remote site. So the tools are there. It's what you do with them. And in this case, I will probably like try to use the API to generate a better suited source data, like a JSON file, an XML file, and then migrate from there.
Yeah, I was actually curious about that because my preference is to almost never migrate directly from a database. Like I almost always either generate some CSV, sometimes I'll occasionally do like a view, like a JSON view, if it's like something that I know it's going to be updated before I actually can run the migration. But I almost never connect directly to the database. I mean, even if it's non-Drupal, like I'll write a SQL query that does whatever I need to do to the data and generates either JSON files or CSVs. I just find you have more control. It's much easier to see specifically what the source is sometimes than, if you're trying to connect to a Drupal database and letting kind of the Migrate API handle, collating all the information. I think that the debugging just becomes more complex in that case.
Yeah, the tools for moving from Drupal 6 or Drupal 7 are incredible. And those connect directly to the database. So for those one, I still recommend, embracing what is already there. But again, these are tools, and you do what you need to do. You use them for your best convenience. In a recent project, what we did, it was a Drupal 6 to Drupal 9 migration, and we connected directly to the Drupal 6 database, but at the same time, we created CSV files, and at the same time, we created a new copy of the Drupal 9 site where people were entering content. So at the end of the project, I was reading from 3 different sources to populate the main one, Drupal 6, CSV files, and a copy of the Drupal 9 site where people were starting to enter content while the site was being finished building.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fairly common paradigm. I mean, it makes sense if it's a one-to-one move just to connect to the database, but when you're manipulating the data, then sometimes it's like I find that sometimes just generating the source in a slightly different way saves so much time on the migration side. But if it's a one-to-one migration, yeah, that's when I'll kind of just look to the database. Like if it's articles and it's just title, picture, and some body text, right? You can just pull that directly from the database.
Yeah,
wholesale.
One of my first migration project was actually like a non-Drupal source. It was just a very old static website. So back then I used Beautiful Soup in Python to scrape the site.
Oh,
And
really?
from that scraping, I created CSV files, which were, my source to get into Drupal. So, at the end, you might have heard the analogy that Drupal is this, Lego pieces that you put together. The Migrate API is also that. Like it's an analogy. Like you have so many different tools. Like one of the articles cover about 50 modules that extend the Migrate API, so you can do very crazy stuff like mixing and matching to do what you need.
Makes sense.
So I think I'm going to go out a little bit off of Drupal migration topic here and go to another topic. And this is you at the top of the show, you mentioned that you were using some new tools to help with your new versions of your, I'll call them products. And today you have a blog series that you can consume in HTML. Then you also have that in a PDF format. And I think you also then have it in e-reader files. And I'm curious about anyone who else was trying to do that, any recommendations you have on having like a single source of content and moving it to those different formats.
So speaking about the series itself, when I first started working on it was using Google Docs, and those Google Docs were later moved manually into Drupal. That's kind of ironic because I was talking about migrations, but I was literally copying the text from the Google Docs into the WYSIWYG in Drupal and losing a lot of time with the formatting there. And that was the initial version, like just the online. When I wanted to offer it as part of an ebook, what I did was I used a website called Linkpub, and they allow you to do a lot of things, like including publishing from a Word document. But I didn't want to do that. What I did instead was use Markdown files. So I had yet another format. I wrote in Markdown, and when you have that content, Linkpub itself is going to be responsible for generating the PDF, the ebook, the movie format. So you just like throw Markdown there with some specific flavor that they have called Markua, and they are going to generate the files for you. And that was a nightmare to maintain. Like I was maintaining 3 different copies, and like putting things into context. My goal with the website understanddrupal.com is to make information freely available, free if possible, or low prices. But the point is that I wanted to put the information there, and I wanted to put it in multiple languages and multiple formats. So in the website, I support English, Spanish, and French, and I write in text and in video format. So trying to maintain 3 different copies in sync was too complicated. So for the new version of the series, I am consolidating everything into Markdown. And also, like for the most part, it was a one-person show back then, and I want to allow people to, other people to interact with the new version of the series. So to keep some sane for myself and just like improve the workflow, I am switching to Markdown, and from there, making the translations and eventually making the video series. As for the tools that I mentioned, I had a conversation earlier this year with Amber and Joe from Drupalize Me, and we were discussing about why they use Drupalize Me, and what they recommended is, we use Veil for things like passive voice checking, like making sure that your titles are formatted in a standard format. They also use another tool called Remark that is about linting your Markdown itself, like making sure that you are consistent with how you create lists, how you create bold text, and so on. And we can put links to all these tools in the show notes, but basically it's like trying to keep a standard. And as I said before, I want to open it up even for the community if they want to come together, send a pull request to update some of the content, add translations to it. So I'm trying to figure out a way to allow participation, and I think that steps that I'm taking will help with that, because even the first version with those 3 different formats was a nightmare for myself.
Do you manage the French version yourself too? do you speak French, or is there somebody else that's doing that for you?
I am learning French, and one of my reasons and one of my goals is actually teach in French. And as I said before, I am not a native English speaker. I can relate to the burden of not understanding the official documentation. I can relate to the difficulties of not having resources in your own language. So I want to break at least the language barrier. Like if you want to learn Drupal, if you want to learn either migrations or site building concepts, I have material for that in different languages, and I'm using understanddrupal.com as like my repository to put all that content for the community. And again, English, Spanish, and French. So I am learning with the goal of being able to teach more people to reach a broader audience. That being said, my French is not that well yet. It's not at that level. So I am able to read and listen. Like producing content is more complicated for me. So I do some of that, but also my brother Carlos, who he's helping with the understanddrupal.com project. He also knows French, English, Spanish, a little bit of German, a little bit of Japanese. So he's genius.
Oh, okay.
So he,
Wow.
for the most part, takes care of the French translation, and then I do a review, like a technical review, and that's what we publish.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Understand Drupal project, and maybe a little bit about your brother's involvement?
Yeah. So as I said, I want to save people's time. Like I used to when I present trainings on site building, I say this, which is totally true. Like today, I can teach in 7 hours what might have taken me 7 months to learn. So being able to distill that content and lower the barrier for people to learn, to adopt Drupal, you're providing the knowledge, and they can be changing their own communities. They can be changing the world. So this is my way to give back to the community and, if you will, to the world. So my goal with the project is, make it as accessible as possible and to reach the widest audience that I can possibly can. So we initially set the standard that we will be produce content in 3 languages at least, and in 2 formats: English, Spanish, and French, text and video. And due to time constraints, that we have not reached that point yet, but that's the goal. And I think this year we're going to make a bigger push, and starting with the update of the series. Maybe this is an exclusive here at the podcast, but
Okay.
our plan is to publish the series in English first, the next month in Spanish, and the next month in French. So we expect that by the end of the year, the second edition will be available in text format in all those 3 languages, available for free to read online.
Wow.
Very cool. You heard it here first, folks. If you have any...
One thing that now that I have said it out loud is like I have made a commitment with the community, so I cannot let myself, fail. That's basically how the first edition came into being. I tweeted about, I will be writing a migration series one day, like one article every day for a month, and then that was a public commitment, and I had to do it. So
okay, there you go.
This is to keep myself accountable also.
Okay.
our listeners will look for that. Speaking of our listeners, if you have any questions or feedback, you can reach out to us on Twitter at talkingdrupal.com at talkingdrupal. You can also interact with us at the Talking Drupal channel in the Drupal Slack, or you can email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can get show updates by signing up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
If you are running a Drupal camp and have one coming soon, we'd like to help you promote that. You could go to talkingdrupal.com/camp promo and learn how you can get your information out on our show.
And we'd like to thank our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron by going to talkingdrupal.com and choosing Become a Patron, and you get a little bit of the before and after show.
So Mauricio, this hour went by extremely fast. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we missed?
I would like also mention that I want to dedicate as much time as possible to this project. And if you want to support it, you can also do it like buying the ebook version. That's why, that's one way to support the project. You can also buy the course. You can keep recording donations or one-time donations. So if you go to understanddrupal.com/supporters, you will find different ways in which you can support the project. The first edition of the series came to be because Agarik literally allowed me to take a month off to focus on the series.
Wow.
And on top of that,
Wow.
they were doing technical reviews, they were doing editing. Like it was myself full-time basically for a month working on the series. And I would not be able to do that without their support. And also they were doing more other stuff to support me in that time. And also Drupalize Me and Centauro step up to offer financial support as well. So as I said, like I would love to give more to the community, but I also need to like buy the time, if you will.
Sure.
So you can do that by going to understanddrupal.com/supporters, and there are different options for you to chip into the project. And I appreciate any support, whether it is financial or just spreading the voice about what we're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you for mentioning that. If anyone wanted to reach out to you and discuss this course or anything else with you in more detail, how would they do that?
DinarCon, I go by DinarCon on Twitter and Drupal.org. I am also very active in the migration channel in Slack, giving support and also like learning from other people. Mauricio@dinarte.me, that's my email. And you can go to understanddrupal.com and agari.coop for, if you need help with your project. We have done, from millions of records, multi-languages, which you can throw anything at us, and we have a very big and good team to help you with that.
Thank you for joining us. Nick, how about you? How can people reach you?
You can reach me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And I'm Stephen Cross at stephencross.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.